This is a still image from the footage recorded by Els Van Doren's helmet camera during her skydiving venture, just moments preceding her tragic demise. Despite being a highly skilled and experienced skydiver with numerous successful jumps, this particular instance led to an unfortunate end that nobody expected, with both her main and backup parachutes malfunctioning. Initially deemed an accident, a lingering suspicion persisted, prompting a more thorough investigation that shed light to the dark secrets in Van Doren's life and uncovered a shocking revelation. This was not any other skydiving venture that had gone wrong. This was actually a murder case and was dubbed by the media as the parachute murder. This is the twisted case of Els Van Doren. Els Van Doren was a 38-year-old Belgian woman married to an Antwerp jeweler named Jan de Wilde, and together they had 2 children, Vincent de Wilde and Carol de Wilde. While she worked in the family's jewelry store, Van Doren's true passion lay in skydiving. Initially taking up the sport with her husband in 1994, Van Doren surpassed his interest as her enthusiasm grew. With 2,300 jumps under her belt, she was an experienced skydiver. Every weekend and on bank holidays, she devoted her time to skydiving. In 1998, she delved into formation jumping and, by 2001, became a member of an all-female skydiving team who called themselves the Divas. The team even competed in the World Skydiving Championships in 2003, but unfortunately, Van Doren had to exit the group in 2004 due to health issues stemming from a hernia. After her recovery, Van Doren opted to skydive for enjoyment instead of competing. She became a member of the Svartberg Parachute Club, and by 2006, her tally of successful jumps, as mentioned earlier, had surpassed 2,300. It was within this club that she formed a close friendship with a fellow skydiver, 26-year-old schoolteacher, Els Clottemans. Given their shared first name, Van Doren would later suggest the nickname Babs for her younger friend to minimize any potential confusion within the skydiving club they both attended. A certain gentleman by the name Marcel Summers also belonged to the same club and was acquainted with both women. The trio not only developed a strong friendship, but also became diving partners during their skydiving ventures. With time, Van Doren found herself developing a stronger bond with Marcel, even though she was a married woman. Their initially platonic relationship gradually evolved into a romantic entanglement. Her family was used to her spending weekends away at the skydiving club, and this unknowingly provided a convenient cover, which prevented her husband from growing suspicious about her relationship with Marcel. They often frequented Marcel's apartment, spending their weekends together without any worry. Little did Van Doren realize that she and Babs were not just sharing a first name, but also the same man. Unbeknownst to both women, Marcel had been secretly involved with both of them intimately. To manage both affairs, Marcel devised a schedule, allocating specific days for each woman. Fridays were dedicated to spending time with Babs, while Saturdays were reserved for Van Doren. This arrangement proved advantageous for Marcel for some period, however it would be short-lived when an unexpected twist awaited them, one particular weekend. On the evening of Friday, November 10, 2006, Babs arrived at Marcel's residence as per their regular weekly arrangement. Unbeknownst to her, Els Van Doren had decided to surprise Marcel by showing up unexpectedly that same night. Babs and Marcel had been dining together at the time, and upon returning to Marcel's apartment, they were met with Van Doren, who was waiting outside his door. The subsequent conversation that took place was unknown, but what was known for sure is that night, it was not Babs who shared Marcel's bed. Instead, she found herself relegated to sleeping in a sleeping bag on the living room floor, while Van Doren and Marcel took the next phase to the bedroom. There in the living room, Babs noticed Van Doren's parachute and other skydiving gear in close proximity. Feeling wounded and betrayed after being deceived and replaced by her friend, Babs succumbed to an unthinkable action, one that would culminate in a tragic outcome later on. On November 18, 2006, 12 members of the skydiving club, including Van Doren, Babs, and Marcel, embarked on a flight over Flanders. The plan involved Van Doren, Babs, Marcel, and another skydiver named Tom executing a 4-person formation jump at 13,000 feet. In this formation, they would interlock hands before releasing and deploying their parachutes. As they readied for the jump, Els, Marcel, and Tom leaped from the plane as intended. However, it seemed that Babs, perhaps due to a delay or intentionally, jumped slightly later than the others. During the freefall, Babs was not able to catch up with the group, and therefore, at 9,000 feet, Marcel, Van Doren, and Tom broke the formation, preparing to safely open their parachutes. At this juncture, it became evident that a serious issue had arisen. As Van Doren attempted to engage her parachute by pulling the cords, it refused to open. Striving to remain composed, she recollected the emergency procedures during her training, and having encountered a failed parachute once before, she had successfully deployed the reserve parachute on that occasion. However, in this instance, hurtling through freefall at approximately 200 kilometers per hour, she had a mere 20 seconds or less to execute a life-saving maneuver for a successful landing. Despite her efforts, pulling the reserve cord proved futile, and the parachute remained unresponsive. With her desperation escalating, she persisted in tugging at both the main parachute and reserve cords, yet no response ensued. Marcel, who was 800 meters above, observed Van Doren, who was a mere 500 meters from the ground, and sensed that something was wrong, as her parachute had still not been deployed, but he could do nothing but just witness the unfolding horror. In a final, desperate attempt, Van Doren tried to untangle the cords of her parachute, hoping to activate it, but her fate had already been sealed. Meanwhile, on the ground, in the town of Opglabbeek, as these events occurred, a woman was outside hanging laundry in her garden. A resounding thud made her grow alarmed at what had happened. Glancing upward, she witnessed an individual descending from the sky with a parachute towards her garden. This spectacle wasn't unfamiliar, given that her residence was merely a few kilometers from the skydiving club and its landing field. While turning to resume her laundry task, the woman spotted a white fabric entangled on top of her shrubs. Drawing closer, she saw a person lying amidst the bushes. Swiftly, she called her husband, who was also in the garden attending to maintenance duties, and they promptly contacted emergency services. That person was Els Van Doren, who they assumed was one of the skydivers, but unfortunately did not display any signs of life. On the other hand, Marcel secured a safe landing spot and sprinted through the streets, frantically calling out for Van Doren and trying to pinpoint her location. Spotting an ambulance, Marcel gave chase, following it to the nearby site where Van Doren had descended. As he rushed towards her, he had to be restrained, allowing the emergency crew to approach. Upon the arrival of emergency services, resuscitation efforts were initiated, but proved futile. Els Van Doren had succumbed. Marcel vehemently insisted on preserving Van Doren's parachute untouched, asserting the abnormality of both the main and reserve parachutes failing to open. He then contacted her husband Jan and delivered the devastating news. Jan hurried to his wife's side, while Tom and Babs returned to the parachute club to relay the tragic news of Van Doren's demise to the other members. As the gravity of the news sank in for the club's members, Babs, overwhelmed, sank to her knees, releasing a mournful wail. Elle's husband, Jan, arrived at the club to gather her belongings, encountering Babs, who volunteered to retrieve the items. He observed her seemingly motionless and noted a peculiar grin on her face at that moment. Babs proceeded towards the changing rooms, with Jan trailing closely. However, upon arrival, Babs abruptly shut the door, locking Jan out. He recounted that Babs took a considerable amount of time before eventually emerging with Van Doren's belongings. Meanwhile, at the accident site, the police had gathered Van Doren's parachute and helmet, the latter equipped with a video camera capturing her ill-fated jump. An autopsy, conducted to ascertain her state, revealed no traces of alcohol or drugs that might have impaired her functionality. Her demise was classified as either a homicide or a suicide, attributed to numerous fractures and internal bleeding resulting from the impact of the fall. Suspicions arose within Van Doren's family, pointing toward the possibility of her being murdered by someone within her skydiving club, an individual well-versed on how the parachute works. Consequently, the club members were discouraged from attending her funeral, a plea that some members, including Els Clottemans, disregarded. The family's anguish intensified when the police disclosed that Van Doren had been engaged in a prolonged extramarital affair with Marcel Summers, spanning over 5 years. Jan, in particular, felt deeply wounded, discovering that fellow club members were aware of the affair, some of whom he considered friends from his own club membership. To compound matters, Van Doren had falsely informed her club peers that she was separated from her husband. Her funeral took place a mere day before her daughter Carol's 15th birthday. During this solemn occasion, Carol addressed her mother through a heartfelt statement, recounting the family's repeated pleas for her to cease skydiving. She conveyed the family's longing for her presence. She, however, concluded her remarks by acknowledging her mother's individuality and emphasizing that she would have been unhappy if she had to abandon what she loved to do. In response to the escalating concerns surrounding the failure of Van Doren's reserve parachute, the police initiated an investigation shortly after the funeral. A parachuting specialist, well-versed in parachute mechanics, was enlisted to scrutinize Van Doren's parachute, seeking to identify any irregularities. Swiftly, the expert discerned a critical absence, a vital component of her parachute: the pilot chute. This small auxiliary parachute usually plays a pivotal role in deploying either the main or reserve parachute. Its intentional removal was evident, signaling deliberate interference. Additionally, clear indications of tampering surfaced, notably the severed drawstring to the pilot chute, responsible for activating the main parachute, and one of the hanging straps connected to the emergency parachute. Upon reviewing the last bodycam footage from Van Doren's ill-fated jump, an unidentified red fabric appeared suspended in front of her face. Not recognized as part of Van Doren's skydiving gear, investigators struggled to find out the origin of this object. They requested and urged the residents of Opklabeek to do thorough checks of their gardens and nearby surroundings in a bid to uncover the red item, and if found, it was emphasized that the discovery be handled cautiously as potential evidence, as it possibly contained DNA from the individual who had sabotaged Van Doren's parachute, but unfortunately, no one succeeded in locating this crucial piece. On the Monday following Els Van Doren's tragic demise, a miraculous discovery came to light as the pilot chute was mysteriously found by Babs. She claimed that on returning from Marcel's apartment, she spotted the chute hanging from a tree during her journey between Opklabeek and Genk. Rather than contacting the police directly, Babs opted to inform Marcel of her find. Upon learning of the discovery, Marcel made the call to the police, who promptly proceeded to the tree site. Upon their arrival, the police encountered a nervous, troubled, and visibly emotional Babs. However, their suspicions were aroused regarding Clottemans' miraculous discovery of the pilot chute. She asserted that it was purely coincidental, attributing it to her decision to take a different route home that day compared to her usual journey. According to her account, being stuck behind a slow-moving tractor led her to glance upward, where she spotted the chute dangling around 20 meters above, interpreting it as a heavenly sign from Van Doren. Police, however, remained skeptical, as the fact that the pilot chute was missing was known only to the investigators at that point. At this point, the primary suspects implicated in the presumed murder of Van Doren included her husband, Jan, her lover, Marcel, and her friend, Els Clottemans. Police conducted searches at Marcel's residence and would later clear him as a suspect. Jan, Van Doren's husband, was also later cleared as a suspect by the authorities. Investigative efforts extended to Els Clottemans' home, where items such as her phone, laptop, and a diary documenting her emotions, as per her psychiatrist's recommendation, were confiscated by the police. Babs was subsequently summoned for questioning at the police station, aiming to obtain further information about her relationships with Marcel, Van Doren, and the events surrounding Van Doren's demise. Throughout the interrogation, Clottemans vehemently denied any involvement in sabotaging Van Doren's parachute. Instead, she attempted to shift blame onto either Marcel, suggesting he kept Van Doren's gear during her weekend stays, or her husband Jan, with whom she purportedly stored her gear during the week. Following the initial questioning, Clottemans was released and allowed to return home. However, a second interview scheduled for December 20th, 2006, saw her absence. Subsequent investigations revealed that she had attempted taking her own life earlier that morning, having taken an overdose combination of sleeping pills and antidepressants. Discovered unresponsive by her mother, Babs was swiftly taken to hospital for urgent treatment. In letters addressed to her loved ones before the act, she conveyed the difficulty of coping with the loss of her close friend and expressed the overwhelming stress of being implicated as a murder suspect in the case. After recuperating, Babs was admitted to a psychiatric facility where she was carefully monitored for a duration of 15 days. Having been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and depression years earlier, this marked not her first attempt at self-harm. Marcel had chose to sever ties with her, contending that he perceived her actions as an attention-seeking ploy, asserting that she had no genuine intent to end her life. Marcel speculated that she strategically took the pill shortly before anticipating her mother's return, suggesting her primary motive was to divert attention from her alleged involvement in Van Doren's death. He presumed that the police were closing in on her, ensnaring her in her own lies. Shortly thereafter, still receiving psychiatric care, Els Clottemans found herself under arrest on January 11, 2007, suspected of the murder of Els Van Doren. Her appearance in court on January 19, 2007, resulted in the decision to keep her in custody while the ongoing investigation unfolded. Despite being asked to undergo a polygraph test, Clottemans declined, and this measure was never carried out. A more detailed investigation of Els Van Doren's skydiving equipment revealed that the parachute cords had been deliberately cut using a pair of scissors, and the individual responsible for this act was likely a right-handed person. As of March 2007, Babs had spent 3 months in prison, enduring extensive interrogation without admitting guilt. During the questioning, she did concede to being the sender of an anonymous letter addressed to Van Doren, asserting that her actions towards her family were wrong. Jan had discovered this letter, but interpreted it as a critique of Van Doren's frequent absence from her family due to skydiving. He discarded the letter without attaching much significance to it. However, it became evident that Babs intended this as a warning for Van Doren to bring an end to her involvement with Marcel. Additionally, she admitted to making anonymous calls to Marcel, intentionally timed when she knew he was with Van Doren, and tried to intimidate them. Upon scrutinizing Babs's automatic activation device, or an AAD, investigators noted that she jumped later than the rest of the team and activated her parachute earlier, speculating that it gave her a vantage position to witness the unfolding events from above. This strategic move also allowed her to monitor the location where Van Doren's black pilot chute had landed, potentially for retrieval afterwards. In September 2008, Clottemans' lawyer successfully secured her release on bail, and despite the ongoing investigation, she resumed to work in a school. The murder trial commenced on September 24, 2010, with the prosecution expressing confidence in the adequacy of the evidence to secure a murder charge against Clottemans. The motive presented was rooted in jealousy upon discovering that her lover was engaged in a relationship with her close friend. In a previous statement to investigators, Clottemans had admitted to being aware that she held a subordinate position to Van Doren in the eyes of Marcel Summers, acknowledging that she was the second best since Summers clearly preferred Van Doren over her. Consequently, driven by a desperate desire to eliminate her romantic rival and remove Van Doren from the equation, the prosecution asserted a compelling motive for the alleged murder. Clottemans' defense attorney contended that the prosecution relied solely on circumstantial evidence and alleged accusations to support their case. During her testimony, Clottemans asserted that she did not envision a future with Marcel and engaged intimately with him solely due to her low self-esteem. At one point, she even attempted to shift blame towards Carol, Van Doren's daughter, suggesting that she might have sought to retaliate against her mother for being away most of the weekends. However, despite her earnest efforts to manipulate the jury and divert blame, their judgment prevailed. On October 20, 2010, Els Clottemans was found guilty of murdering her friend Els Van Doren and received a 30-year prison sentence. During the trial, Babs, steadfast in her assertion of innocence, was placed under close observation to prevent her from self-harming again. Later on, she lodged an appeal, contending that police had questioned her in the absence of her attorney. In May 2011, her appeal was rejected. However, in June 2022, following a third appeal, and after serving only 12.5 years, Els Clottemans was granted conditional release from prison and is now a free woman. It is unfortunate what happened to Els Van Doren, and also sad what her family had to go through after everything came to light. Our deepest sympathies go out to the life that was lost and the grieving loved ones she left behind. Garbage collectors who were making their rounds early one morning found a home ablaze and immediately called in the fire brigade, who rushed to the scene. While extinguishing the fire, they observed movement in the upper bedroom window. Someone was trying to grab their attention and clearly needed help. Medical personnel were summoned to the location, and the individual, in a state of shock and unable to communicate, was rescued. Subsequently, the individual was transported to the hospital, where they later slipped into a coma. Meanwhile, bodies were recovered from the premises, and authorities determined that the victims had been murdered rather than perishing in the fire. This unsettling revelation prompted widespread speculation. Who could have perpetrated such a heinous crime against this innocent and beloved family? This is the shocking case of the Roman family. Jean-Claude Roman was born in Lons-le-Saunier, France on February 11, 1954, and raised in Clairvaux-les-Lacs in Jura. He attended Lons-le-Saunier's high school until he completed his baccalaureate. In 1971, he started classes at Lycée du Parc in Lyon, but left after one term. Later, he joined medical school. He would later marry a woman named Florence Crollet. Florence Crollet was born on March 6, 1956. She studied at the University of Lyon to become a doctor. It is there that she met Jean-Claude Roman. Jean-Claude, who was a distant cousin of the family, initially didn't catch Florence's interest. They also barely knew each other and didn't spend a lot of time together. However, over time, through their mutual friends and study sessions, they started spending more time together. Jean-Claude Roman was immediately smitten with Florence and made persistent efforts to win her over. She, on the other hand, saw him as an ordinary guy, not particularly attractive to her or well-spoken. Florence had envisioned marrying a typical doctor, intelligent, attractive, and charming. Following a failed second-year exam, she switched from medicine to pharmacy. Together with Roman and Luc l'Admiral, who passed their exams, they maintained a routine for the next decade, studying, taking exams, and supporting each other until graduation. In 1980, Florence and Jean-Claude Roman tied the knot, and 6 years later, they had their first child, Caroline. 2 years after Caroline's birth, their son Antoine arrived. Florence lived the life of a conventional wife and mother, working at local pharmacies to support her family, while her husband worked at the World Health Organization in Geneva, a short distance from their home in France. Florence was out and about in Ferney, France, a few days post-Christmas in 1992. Her children, Caroline and Antoine, were at school, while Jean-Claude was at work in Geneva. It was a typical day, reminiscing about their recent Christmas festivities. While out, she bumped into the school president, who had something on his mind since before the holidays. Politely exchanging holiday greetings, they chatted about their Christmas experiences. The conversation gradually shifted to an intriguing incident involving Florence's husband. The president mentioned the headmaster's demotion due to an affair with a teacher, prompting a school board meeting. Florence remembered the incident, but was uncertain where the president was leading with the conversation. He mentioned his intention to discuss the matter with Jean-Claude, as he also served on the school board. The president's secretary attempted to find Jean-Claude's contact information in the World Health Organization directory, given his employment there, but strangely, his name was not listed. Florence found this amusing as she laughed it off, but at the same time, she was intrigued. She assured the president that there must be a valid explanation for the absence of his name and number, promising to address it with her husband upon his return from work. After exchanging farewells, they never spoke again. Jean-Claude Roman kept his work life quite private, sharing minimal details with both family and friends. Florence held the belief that her husband engaged in significant research and commanded respect in the medical field. He maintained a clear boundary between his professional and personal life, to the extent that Florence never had access to his office phone number, as Roman had insisted on wanting to remain undisturbed during work hours. If Florence ever required urgent communication with him, she had to page him, and he would promptly return her call at his earliest convenience. Friends often inquired about Jean-Claude's role at the WHO in conversations with Florence. They would ask, "What exactly does Jean-Claude do at the WHO?" Florence would attempt to deflect the question with a chuckle, confessing that she too was uncertain. Occasionally, she would playfully speculate that one day she might discover her husband was a secret spy. It was during the Christmas season of 1992 that Florence learned of an annual Christmas tree event organized by the WHO.
This gathering allowed staff members to bring their families to the office to decorate a large Christmas tree together. Surprisingly, her husband had never mentioned this event to her. Florence felt unsettled by the situation. From the school president's revelation about her husband's absence in the WHO directory to the discovery of the unmentioned family event at his workplace after over a decade of service, these incidents likely lingered in Florence's thoughts. The extent to which these revelations troubled Florence internally remains uncertain, as it is unclear whether she confronted her husband about them. As recounted by Florence's brother, who joined the family for the holiday season, a profound sadness seemed to shadow Florence during those days. The conversations that transpired within the household during this period are left to speculation. The days rolled by, ushering in the new year of 1993. A couple of days into the year, Florence and Jean-Claude Roman found themselves shopping together. Insisting that Roman purchase a new suit, Florence eventually persuaded him. Later that same day, after parting ways with his wife, Roman made a visit to a pharmacy, placing an order set to be ready by January 9th. On the evening of January 5th, Roman made withdrawals from 2 different ATMs, totaling 2,000 francs. He generously gave 500 francs to a homeless individual he encountered before proceeding to a gun store. Exiting the store, he carried tear gas canisters, cartridges, a silencer for a .22 caliber rifle, and a stun wand. Returning home, the night passed uneventfully, and time passes until a frantic call to the fire brigade was placed on January 11th at 4 a.m., reporting a fire engulfing the house. Garbage collectors on their early morning rounds discovered the blazing house and promptly alerted the fire brigade, who rushed to the location. While extinguishing the fire, the responders noticed movement in the upstairs bedroom window, indicating someone was inside, seeking help. Medical personnel were summoned, and the person who was Jean-Claude Roman was rescued from the residence. Upon extraction, he appeared in a state of shock, unresponsive as paramedics attended to him. Subsequently, Jean-Claude was transported to the hospital, where he eventually lapsed into a coma. Within a short span, the fire was extinguished, enabling the first responders to enter the premises. Their family friend Dr. Luc Ladmiral was summoned to the scene, witnessing with dread as stretchers carried out the charred remains of Antoine, Caroline, and Florence. Whenever a household fire results in fatalities, the police launch an inquiry to uncover the circumstances surrounding the incident. This process aims to offer closure to the bereaved families and eliminate the possibility of any criminal activity. Therefore, following the tragic fire at the Roman residence, law enforcement authorities initiated an investigation, given the magnitude of the loss of an entire family of a prominent doctor. During the examination of Florence's remains, the medical team made a disconcerting observation: evidence of blunt force trauma to the back of her skull. This revelation sparked suspicion and intrigue, particularly after determining that Florence's demise resulted from blunt force trauma rather than the fire itself. During the examination of the children, another distressing revelation emerged. Contrary to initial assumptions, both Caroline and Antoine did not perish in the fire. Instead, they met their demise from gunshot wounds hours prior to the inferno. This stark reality indicated that the events unfolded before the household was consumed by flames. Subsequently, law enforcement commenced an inquiry into the suspicious deaths of Florence and her children. However, with Jean-Claude Roman incapacitated in a coma, rendering him unable to provide any information, investigators faced the daunting task of pursuing alternative leads. Transforming the Roman residence into a crime scene, authorities reached out to relatives, acquaintances, and neighbors in a bid to unravel the mysteries surrounding the family. Luc Ladmiral, the doctor who witnessed the victims being removed from the scene, was contacted as part of the investigation. Uncertain about the unfolding events, he struggled to comprehend the situation. When questioned by investigators about potential enemies of the family, Luc couldn't identify any. Nevertheless, he was summoned for an interview. Several days later, Luc found himself facing police officers who probed into the family's relationships and recent events that could have triggered the fire. Despite thorough questioning, the consensus remained unchanged. The family enjoyed a positive reputation, and no significant incidents preceded the tragedy. Subsequently, the focus shifted to Jean-Claude Roman, revealing a shocking revelation. Roman had never been employed by the World Health Organization, nor had he delivered any lectures at the University of Dijon. In fact, he was not a qualified doctor at all, let alone being employed. Initially skeptical, Luc's disbelief grew
as he recollected their shared academic journey, which slowly led him to a startling realization. He recounted to the authorities an incident from their second year when he had noticed Jean-Claude Romain's absence during an exam. This departure from Romain's usual behavior had raised concerns for Luc. Upon visiting Romain at his residence, he observed his friend's ailing condition, who had clammy skin, pale complexion, and dark circles under his eyes. Jean-Claude Romain disclosed that he was battling lymphoma, a form of cancer, albeit manageable, exacerbated by exam-related stress. At Romain's request, Luc pledged to keep this information confidential, especially from Florence. Investigators determined that Luc didn't have any additional pertinent details. Consequently, they awaited the forensic laboratory's findings on the charred residence, hoping to glean further insights for their inquiry. Investigators noted peculiarities within the residence. They discovered that all doors had been locked internally, indicating that no unauthorized individuals had entered the premises. Initially, an accidental fire was the primary hypothesis until the condition of the bodies was revealed. Subsequent findings hinted at a more sinister turn of events, prompting the urgent need to interview Jean-Claude. During Jean-Claude Romain's coma-induced weeks, law enforcement zeroed in on him as their prime suspect, initiating a thorough investigation. Although Romain lacked a medical degree, his extended tenure at the university raised suspicions. Upon contacting the educational institution, it was confirmed that Romain had pursued studies for 12 years. While he successfully completed his first-year exams, he failed to pass those in the second year. Exploiting the absence of enrollment restrictions, Romain continuously re-enrolled in the second year throughout his academic tenure. All those years of academic dedication, attending lectures and studying medical books, yet Jean-Claude's failure to pass the second-year examination seemed perplexing. The possibility of oversleeping and missing the exam session lingered as a plausible explanation. A chance for redemption had presented itself with the opportunity to retake the exam months later, but he never showed up. As investigators delved into the deaths of Florence and the children, they were confronted with another grim discovery. Jean-Claude's uncle, seeking to relay the tragic news to his parents, arrived at their residence only to encounter an eerie silence. Upon entering, he discovered the lifeless bodies of his mother and father, both victims of gunshot wounds. A ballistic examination confirmed that Jean-Claude's parents had been fatally shot with the same firearm used on Antoine and Caroline.
Furthermore, the close proximity of their estimated time of death indicated a deliberate connection. The unfolding events only grew more mysterious. Following the public disclosure of the tragedies, the police received an anonymous call from a woman unwilling to disclose her identity or any personal information, expressing reluctance to involve herself in the investigation. However,
she did possess crucial information to share, revealing that she had engaged in a romantic relationship with Jean-Claude Romain after meeting him in Paris, and she too had been told that he was a researcher at the World Health Organization. Romain had misled her into believing he was a specialist with influential connections attributed to his purported role. The woman had been led to believe that Jean-Claude Romain was actively involved in and financing significant research projects. Moreover, he portrayed the banks in Geneva as highly advantageous. Leveraging his supposed position, Romain enticed her with the opportunity to invest funds in a Swiss bank offering an impressive 18% interest rate return. Through persuasive tactics, Romain managed to persuade his lover to make a financial investment. Initially hesitant, they reached an agreement wherein the woman would provide him with 90,000 francs for investment, with the expectation of receiving returns after 3 months. As the deadline approached in early January, she reminded Jean-Claude Romain of their arrangement, emphasizing her need for the funds to sustain herself and her family. Following negotiations, they arranged to meet for a dinner gathering, with Romain extending an invitation to dine with a prominent political figure, sparking the woman's interest and eagerness to reclaim her investment. On the agreed day, Romain picks her up in Paris to embark on their anticipated journey. As night descended, Jean-Claude Romain and the woman found themselves still on the road, clearly lost. Suddenly, Romain pulled over and launched a surprise attack on the woman inside the car. He employed tear gas, a stun wand, and a cable in an attempt to incapacitate her.
However, she fiercely fought for her life and managed to escape from the vehicle. Romain pursued her, but inexplicably halted when she pleaded for mercy. It seemed that he realized his plan had failed, and he begged for forgiveness. The excuse he provided to the woman was now familiar to the investigators. He claimed that his lymphoma was flaring up, causing him to behave erratically and unlike his usual self. In a state of survival mode, the woman agreed to remain silent about the incident in exchange for Jean-Claude safely returning her home. Investigators began to develop a grim perception of Jean-Claude Roman. He was a pathological liar, a manipulator, and a scam artist. But the question that lingered in detectives' minds now was he also a murderer? Upon awakening from his coma, Jean-Claude Roman was promptly approached by investigators eager to engage in conversation. With suspicions lingering, they sought a confession from him. However, Roman chose to remain silent. He sat in his hospital bed, gazing into the distance with a vacant expression, refraining from speaking. As inquiries swirled about the events of January 9th, the origins of the fire, the shooting of Antoine and Caroline, the severe injuries sustained by his wife, the discovery of his deceased parents, Jean-Claude faced a barrage of interrogative probes during multiple sessions. Despite the relentless questioning, he divulged nothing. It wasn't until the investigators told him that they knew the truth, that he was not a doctor and was unemployed, that a shift occurred. The tipping point that prompted him to finally break his silence remains unknown, but eventually he began to speak. On the night of January 9th, Jean-Claude and Florence were spending a typical evening at home. After putting the children to bed, they retired to their own bedroom. According to Jean-Claude Roman, his memories of that night abruptly ceased until the chilling recollection of discovering his wife sprawled on their bed, surrounded by a pool of blood, with a bloodied rolling pin in his hand. Uncertain of what transpired, whether an argument had ensued or not, Jean-Claude Roman proceeded to sleep beside his wife and awoke the following morning to prepare breakfast for the children. Caroline and Antoine gathered on the couch to watch a cartoon selected by their father. He served them each a bowl of cereal before joining them to watch television. When the children inquired about their mother's absence, he informed them that she was unwell and needed extra rest. During that morning, Jean-Claude observed that Caroline felt warm, prompting concerns about her health. To prevent any potential illness from spreading, he instructed Caroline to go upstairs to her bedroom. Somehow, Caroline ended up lying face down on the bed with a pillow over her head. Romand couldn't provide a clear explanation to investigators regarding this sequence of events, but speculated that it may have evolved from a game he played with his daughter. Subsequently, he retrieved his .22 caliber rifle, fitted with a silencer, and fatally shot his 7-year-old daughter in the back of her head. In a similar manner, Antoine met his tragic demise. His memories then became hazy. Subsequent evidence presented during the trial indicated that he left the house, purchased newspapers, and appeared to engage in routine activities, portraying a normal demeanor to any casual observer. Upon returning home, he watched television. Although Jean-Claude refuted these details during the trial, one fact remained certain. He received a phone call from his parents, inviting him for lunch before noon on that fateful day. And he accepted the invitation. Departing from his eerily quiet residence, he drove to his parents' home and joined them for lunch. He then summoned his father upstairs under the guise of inspecting a purportedly malfunctioning boiler pipe. Despite his elderly father's physical limitations, he made an effort to examine the pipe at Jean-Claude's request, only to be callously shot in the back by his own son. Descending to where his mother was, he did not concoct any games or stories this time. His mother became the sole victim whom he shot while facing her. The motive behind this act remains a mystery. Before departing, he also shot the family's dog. When questioned about this during the trial, it was the only instance where he exhibited a semblance of remorse. Overcome with emotion, he broke down in sobs and tears, revealing that the dog had been cherished by his children, evoking memories of Caroline. It was at this moment that Jean-Claude Roman resolved to return home and take his own life. However, his plan did not unfold as intended. Recall the earlier mention of his mistress providing him with 90,000 francs for an alleged investment scheme? This was how Jean-Claude Roman sustained himself. He regaled numerous individuals, including his relatives and Florence's family, with tales of extravagant returns on investments, and due to their familiarity with Roman, they placed their full trust in him and they let him cook. Consequently, he amassed substantial sums of money from these trusting individuals over time. He would channel these funds into accounts under his own name in Geneva,
thereby avoiding scrutiny from tax authorities, among others. Moreover, he meticulously managed the family's financial affairs, ensuring that Florence remained unaware of his deceitful activities. Of course, and eventually, the inevitable time to serve what he was cooking had arrived. As expected, the people began demanding the return of their money, along with the promised profits. Regrettably, this was an obligation he could never fulfill. Every single franc he acquired was swiftly spent on his immediate needs, leaving him with virtually nothing saved, despite amassing over 2 million francs across the years. The inevitable moment arrived when he would have to reveal the truth to Florence and all those who had entrusted him with their money. He found himself unable to sustain his web of lies any longer. The mounting pressure left him feeling trapped with no apparent escape. Like many other family annihilators, he convinced himself that by ending their lives, he would actually be sparing his family from the repercussions of his actions. Subsequently, he planned to take his own life, thus avoiding the harsh reality he faced. He believed he would be able to keep lying forever and had never anticipated being discovered or facing the need to confess. He would always just plan to fabricate another falsehood to sustain the charade throughout his life. On June 23, 1996, the trial commenced. He remained mostly silent, seated behind glass with a police officer on each side. He avoided making eye contact and kept his head down. By July 2nd, a verdict had been reached. Jean-Claude Romand was convicted of the murders of his wife, his children, and his parents. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole for 22 years. In 2019, he petitioned for release from prison to reside in a convent. During his incarceration, he had reportedly become a devout Christian. He had accepted his mistakes and would spend the rest of his life repenting as a form of punishment. The judge granted his plea, citing his good conduct as a contributing factor. It is sad and unfortunate what all the victims endured at the hands of this liar, manipulator, and monstrous individual. As we reflect on this horrific tale, our hearts and minds are with the individuals whose lives were abruptly ended and the grieving families and friends they left behind. During the Easter weekend in April 1992, Dana Ewell informed his relatives that he couldn't reach his parents, Dale and Glee Ewell, and his sister, Tiffany Ewell. Dana was still at the family's California beach house, where he had spent the weekend with his girlfriend and her father, an FBI agent. Upon the housekeeper's arrival for duty following the Easter weekend, the discovery she made in the house sent chills down her spine. The distressed housekeeper rushed to a neighbor's home, prompting an immediate call to the police, who arrived at the scene of the grim discovery of the 3 lifeless bodies. Initially presumed to be a botched burglary, it was soon determined that nothing had been stolen, leading authorities to conclude it was a planned murder. But who could have had a motive to kill this innocent family? Investigations ensued, eliminating several potential suspects until one unlikely person emerged as the prime suspect. This is the horrifying case of the Ewell family. Dale Ewell was born in Ohio during the Great Depression, instilling in him a strong work ethic and appreciation for every single dollar he earned. His upbringing in a family that endured economic hardship likely fueled his determination and ambition. After serving in the Air Force, Dale found success as a businessman, eventually becoming the president and owner of Western Piper Sales Incorporated, a company that specialized in selling small aircraft. He expanded his financial ventures by investing in several farms with profits from Western Piper. Dale had married Glee Michelle, a woman who taught in elementary school, worked as a translator for the CIA, and served on a commission at the State Bar of California. Together, they became parents, welcoming Tiffany in 1967 and Dana in 1971. Dale's achievements afforded the Ewell family a comfortable residence in Sunnyside, a beachfront property in Pajaro Dunes, as well as luxury automobiles and designer clothes. The primary source of the Ewells' income stemmed from the sale of light aircraft and extensive investments in the stock market. Having established his aviation enterprise successfully, Dale ventured into purchasing several farms, ultimately amassing significant wealth. Dale and Glee's combined net worth was estimated at $8 million, portraying them as the epitome of the American dream, even though they maintained a modest lifestyle. While Tiffany followed in her parents' footsteps, Dana diverged significantly from their path. While attending university, Dana Ewell portrayed himself as a prosperous entrepreneur, asserting that he was the source of his family's wealth. His fabricated narrative garnered attention from a local newspaper and even made its way into Ewell's school yearbook in 1990. Enrolled at Santa Clara University, Dana was preoccupied with notions of affluence and stylish living. He possessed a BMW and had access to funds enabling him to indulge in luxury items such as jewelry at his leisure. In contrast, his older sister Tiffany, who graduated from Fresno University, exhibited a more down-to-earth demeanor. From a young age, Dana displayed a tendency to lie a lot and fabricated many of his stories. Despite his exceptional intellect and education, Dana's aspirations transcended mere comfort, wealth, and a promising future. He shared his father's ambition, but lacked the determination to pursue his goals through legitimate means. Even during his time as a student at the University of Santa Clara, Dana felt compelled to concoct grandiose tales of his achievements and importance, which were entirely false. He proved to be a pathological liar, deceiving both faculty and peers into believing he was the head of a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Within his intricate web of lies, he portrayed himself as having begun his career as a stockbroker at the age of 18, subsequently transitioning to aircraft sales and ultimately ascending to the presidency of his own aircraft manufacturing company. The underlying tension within the father-son dynamic, characterized by dwindling communication, remained largely concealed from others. Dana's habit of fabricating outlandish tales about himself likely caused embarrassment for his father and could have led to conflicts between them. Despite Dale's upbringing in modest circumstances and his generous support for his children, it appeared that Dana harbored an insatiable sense of entitlement. Despite his privileged upbringing, Dana Ewell portrayed himself as a self-absorbed, egotistical individual primarily focused on his own wealth and social status. On Sunday, April 19, 1992, Sunnyside, California experienced mild, partly sunny weather, creating an ideal Easter Sunday afternoon atmosphere. Dale, aged 59, along with his 57-year-old wife Glee and their 24-year-old daughter Tiffany, had spent the Easter weekend at their beach house. Glee and Tiffany returned directly to Sunnyside by car, while Dale opted to fly his private plane to his hangar before driving home. Unbeknownst to them, upon their arrival home after their 2.5-hour journey, they were ambushed almost immediately upon entering. Tiffany was fatally shot in the head first, followed shortly by Glee, who was shot multiple times. 30 minutes later, as Dale arrived in the driveway, unaware of the tragedy that had befallen his family, he too was fatally shot as he opened the door from the garage into the house. The perpetrator, having stayed in the house, lay in wait for Dale, who had no idea that he had very little time left to live. 2 days later, 21-year-old Dana Ewell, the youngest member of the family, reached out to relatives and friends in Sunnyside, expressing his inability to reach his parents. Despite residing with his parents, Dana had spent the Easter weekend in San Francisco, around 200 miles away, with his girlfriend Monica Zent and her father John Zent, an FBI agent. On Tuesday, April 21, 1992, the Ewells' longtime housekeeper, Juanita Avenita, arrived for her usual work duties. Upon entering the kitchen, she discovered Tiffany's lifeless body lying face down in a pool of blood, her hands tucked beneath her. Distraught, the housekeeper sought help from a neighbor, prompting a call to the police. Meanwhile, Dana was still in Monterey, California, at the time of the murders. Upon being contacted by the authorities, his girlfriend's father promptly arranged for Dana to fly to Fresno. Dana appeared visibly distressed throughout the ordeal. Subsequently, the police embarked on an extensive investigation, dedicating numerous days to gathering evidence and interviewing witnesses. The crime scene was meticulously staged to resemble a failed robbery, but seasoned detectives recognized the signs of a premeditated burglary designed to make it appear as though the family stumbled upon the intruder and was subsequently murdered. Upon closer inspection, detectives noted several anomalies: the absence of weapons, bloodstains, footprints, or DNA evidence. Instead, the detectives observed a methodically planned and executed attack. The precision of the assailant's shots was remarkable, with only one miss, and the perpetrator had even retrieved the spent bullet casings. Inside the home, investigators discovered a box of 9mm ammunition purchased by Dale, later determined to have been used in the killings. Although the home gave the appearance of being ransacked, no valuable items were actually taken. There were no signs of forced entry through windows or doors, and the alarm, typically activated, had been deactivated. The scene seemed deliberately arranged to suggest a burglary in progress upon the Ewells' return. Investigators meticulously delved into the backgrounds of the victims, searching for any clues that might link to their homicides. Dale's past involvements, including selling airplanes for an individual later convicted of drug smuggling in the 1970s, and a problematic real estate transaction with his brother that threatened to cost investors millions, underwent thorough scrutiny. However, both incidents were eventually dismissed as having no connection to the murders. The police systematically eliminated all other potential suspects with motives, ultimately focusing their attention on Dana, who stood to benefit greatly from the tragedy. Being the sole survivor of the Ewell family and the primary beneficiary of the estate, Dana naturally became a person of interest. Despite having a seemingly airtight alibi, being in the company of his girlfriend and her FBI agent father at the time of the murders, police couldn't shake their suspicions about him. Dana's behavior did little to assuage their concerns, only serving to heighten their intuition regarding his involvement. Despite outward displays of distress over the murders, including offering rewards for information and even a $50,000 reward for the capture of the killer, Dana's grief appeared disingenuous. His emotional response to the brutal slaying of his own family seemed lacking, failing to convey the expected horror and anguish. Instead, his focus appeared to be primarily on matters related to his parents' wills and inheritance, rather than mourning the tragic loss of his loved ones. In a particularly unsettling move, he even invited a friend to tour the house, where bloodstains and spatter were still visible, displaying a disturbing lack of sensitivity. Allegedly, he even expressed disdain for the police investigation, claiming they were a bunch of dummies that would never solve the case. Thus began a prolonged and tense game of cat and mouse between Dana and the authorities, spanning 3 grueling years as they pursued every possible lead. Adding fuel to the escalating conflict, Dale's brothers reached out to authorities, accusing their nephew of wrongdoing. They alleged that during the reading of the wills, Dana had flown into a rage upon learning that trust provisions would restrict his access to the $8 million estate until he reached his 30s. According to their account, Dana had even slammed his fist on the desk and shouted, "How could he have done this to me?" referring to his father. The arrangement stipulated that his parents would cover his expenses until he turned 25, followed by receiving investment dividends until he reached 30. Half of it would be accessible to him at the age of 30, with the remaining half available at 35. Before the funerals for Dale, Glee, and Tiffany, the Ewell brothers took steps to hinder Dana's efforts to claim what he believed was rightfully his. However, Dana managed to secure around $300,000 from an insurance policy that either wasn't subject to the trust provisions or had been overlooked by mistake. Dana's uncles, his father's 3 brothers, were actively preventing him from inheriting any portion of his father's assets and wealth, causing significant frustration for Dana. Despite the mounting pressure from investigators closing in on him and accusations from members of his extended family implicating him in the murders as a ploy to gain control of the family estate, Dana continued to live his life seemingly unaffected. He continued to spend money recklessly, splurging on lavish gifts for his girlfriend Monica and even contributing towards her educational expenses. However, the source of his seemingly endless funds remained a puzzle. Suspecting that money played a significant role in the murders, investigators intensified their scrutiny. They uncovered evidence indicating that Dana had been embezzling money from various sources, including his grandmother's $400,000 trust account. By the time detectives intervened, the elderly woman had been left with a mere $2,000 to cover her ongoing care expenses at a nursing facility. The revelation that Dana had exploited his vulnerable grandmother for financial gain only solidified the police's suspicions about his character. Despite this damning discovery, authorities still needed conclusive evidence linking Dana to the murders before they could make an arrest. One of Dana's college acquaintances, who was usually captivated by his elaborate tales and his portrayal of a pampered, affluent lifestyle, was one Joel Radovchich. Joel found Dana intriguing, especially his wealth, success, and apparent ability to effortlessly attract the most attractive women. People around them were puzzled about what they had in common, as they were as different as night and day. While Dana sought higher social status, Joel was more interested in video games, firearms, and explosives. Despite their disparities, Joel's friendship with Dana provided him access to exclusive parties and introductions to desirable women. Shortly after the murders, Joel had dropped out of school. As mentioned earlier, within weeks of the Ewell family's tragic demise, he visited their home for a tour, eventually becoming Dana's roommate in the same residence. Joel's association with Dana marked a crucial turning point in the investigation. Both Dana and Joel began making unusual cash purchases, such as helicopter piloting lessons, despite Joel lacking an apparent source of income. As a result, both individuals came under surveillance, and investigators observed their communication, which was through sophisticated pagers and payphones. Authorities had Dana's pager cloned and wiretapped his landline. In May 1993, Joel was overheard by an officer conversing on a payphone where he was recorded saying, "They don't have evidence. They will try to catch you in a lie." On another occasion, he was heard advising, "Just play the game." And without a doubt, Dana continued playing the game, buying his girlfriend a new car and covering her law school tuition. After exhausting the insurance payout, as previously mentioned, he bilked $400,000 from his grandmother's account, leaving her with only $2,000 to cover her nursing home expenses. In 1994, investigators shifted their focus to forensic analysis, which revealed that the murder weapon was a specialized 9mm assault rifle manufactured in Colorado. Records from the company indicated that such a rifle had been purchased by one Ernest Jack Ponce shortly before April 1992. Interestingly, Jack happened to be a high school friend of Joel. Upon questioning, Jack initially denied buying the gun and later claimed it was purchased as a birthday gift for himself, unknown to Joel, and alleged that the gun had been stolen. The evidence was mounting against Dana and Joel. At one point, detectives attempted to unsettle Dana during their visit to his university dormitory, informing him of their belief that Joel was responsible for murdering his family. Dana remained silent, his face visibly drained of color. After the detectives departed, unaware they were being observed, Dana and his girlfriend Monica, who was present during the visit, hurriedly made a phone call to Radovcic. On March 2, 1995, the police took action and arrested Dana and Joel. Joining them were Peter Radovcic, Joel's brother, and Jack Ponce. Peter had struck a deal with authorities, offering testimony against his brother and Dana in exchange for immunity. He confessed to the police that he had crafted a homemade silencer and attached it to the murder weapon, disposed of the gun barrel, Joel's tennis shoes worn during the killings, and a collection of gun enthusiast magazines. Peter admitted to carrying out these actions in collaboration with Jack Ponce. Upon his arrest, Jack provided a contrasting narrative regarding the firearm. He confessed to purchasing it for Joel, but claimed ignorance about its intended use in the murders. Additionally, he corroborated Peter's account of their joint disposal of evidence. Jack, like Peter, received immunity in exchange for his testimony at trial. As a result of Peter and Jack's statements, the barrel of the murder weapon was located buried in a dirt field in Reseda. Dana and Joel, however, were obviously not offered any plea deals. Instead, they were charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and special circumstances, rendering them eligible for the death penalty. The trial didn't commence until late 1997. Dana and Joel, who had once been close enough to travel to Mexico together, share flying lessons, and even live in the same house where Dale, Glee, and Tiffany were killed, now had separate legal representation and adopted different stances during the trial. Prosecutors contended that Dana's motive stemmed from greed, alleging that he had promised Joel a portion of the inheritance. Dana's attorney argued for his innocence, claiming that Joel and Jack had planned and carried out the murders. Meanwhile, Joel's attorney, acknowledging the weight of the evidence against his client, aimed to save him from the death penalty. During his testimony, Jack Ponce revealed that he not only purchased the murder weapon for Joel and aided in its disposal, but that Joel had also provided him the details of the events that transpired on that fateful day in April 1992, which he was ready to share. Dana had approached Joel, pleading for a favor which was hard for him to reject. Acting as the executor of Dana's plan, Joel entered the Ewell residence with specific instructions. Having meticulously prepared by shaving his entire body, Joel waited patiently for 12 hours, perched on a plastic sheet to avoid leaving any trace of DNA behind, even a small eyelash. He was also instructed to ensure no bullet casings were left at the scene. Tiffany was the first victim, passing by Joel without noticing him before he fatally shot her in the back of the head. Glee, however, caught a glimpse of the assailant and was struck by a bullet. Despite attempting to flee to the office, bleeding profusely, she was pursued and mercilessly shot multiple times by Joel, who then straddled her. In a chilling moment, just before firing the fatal shot, Glee locked eyes with Joel, recognizing him as a friend Dana had introduced to the family a month prior. After fatally shooting Glee, Joel proceeded to change the magazines in the gun and don fresh gloves, awaiting Dale's arrival. He subsequently murdered Dale as well. However, during Jack's testimony recounting Dale's murder from Joel's perspective, he had made a crucial error by mentioning "and I saw the eye," which undermined the credibility of his testimony. The jury viewed his account with skepticism, suspecting greater involvement than he had admitted, but his immunity agreement shielded him from facing charges for the deaths. On May 27, 1998, 8 months after the trial commenced, the jury unanimously found Dana Ewell and Joel Radovchich guilty on all charges. However, they were unable to reach a consensus on the sentencing. While 2 votes spared Joel from the death penalty, Dana narrowly escaped the same fate by only 1 vote. They both received 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Dana was incarcerated at Corcoran State Prison, located 50 miles south of Fresno, where he found himself among fellow inmates including notorious figures like Charles Manson. Unfortunately, his grandmother, whom he had stolen from, passed away in 1999. In the years following his conviction, Dana professed to have undergone a spiritual transformation, embracing Christianity. He is registered on an online prison pen pal platform, where in part of his profile he states, "A finance graduate from Santa Clara University, I was beginning my career in investment banking when some extraordinarily painful events turned my world upside down." Meanwhile, Joel Radovchich was imprisoned at Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, about 2 hours south of San Francisco, which has housed other infamous inmates such as Tex Watson and Robert John Bardo. Jack Ponce went to law school, eventually becoming an attorney. Monica Zent ended her relationship with Dana, completed her law school studies, and established a thriving law practice. While Monica was scrutinized during the investigation, no evidence implicating her involvement could be uncovered, aside from her apparent reluctance to engage in the case that led to her boyfriend's convictions for murder, and the fact that he had utilized some of the ill-gotten funds to contribute towards her law school expenses. Greed, entitlement, heartlessness, 3 words that perfectly described Dana Ewell. Dana's insatiable desire for wealth and his willingness to manipulate and betray those closest to him ultimately led to the brutal demise of his own family. It is sad and unfortunate what befell the victims of this tale at the hands of their avaricious and manipulative brother and son, along with those who aided him.